Question 1. Comparative studies suggest that establishing effective performance benchmarks and targets is crucial for portfolio success. A certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS, is tasked with developing these benchmarks for a diverse portfolio of apartment communities. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and ethical best practices for setting these benchmarks and performance targets? Option A. Establish targets that are highly ambitious and aspirational, focusing solely on aggressive revenue growth without incorporating metrics for resident satisfaction or operational efficiency. Option B. Base benchmarks on anecdotal feedback from a few senior leasing agents and focus performance targets primarily on reducing operating expenses, even if it means deferring necessary maintenance. Option C. Set benchmarks by identifying the single highest performing property in a geographically distant and demographically different market and aiming for all properties to match that performance level within 1 year. Option D. Develop benchmarks based on a comprehensive analysis of historical portfolio performance, current market conditions, and competitor data, setting specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound targets for each property. Correct answer is D. Develop benchmarks based on a comprehensive analysis of historical portfolio performance, current market conditions, and competitor data, setting specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound targets for each property. Explanation. Scenario analysis. Establishing performance benchmarks and targets for apartment portfolios is a critical function for a certified apartment portfolio supervisor. CAPS. The challenge lies in selecting benchmarks that are both ambitious enough to drive improvement and realistic enough to be achievable, while also aligning with the specific objectives of the portfolio and the broader market conditions. A portfolio supervisor must balance the need for financial performance with resident satisfaction and operational efficiency, all within the bounds of applicable regulations and ethical standards. Misaligned benchmarks can lead to demotivation, resource misallocation, and ultimately, underperformance, potentially impacting investor returns and resident well-being. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves developing benchmarks and performance targets that are data-driven, market-aligned, and portfolio-specific. This means analyzing historical performance data, conducting thorough market research to understand competitor performance and resident expectations, and considering the unique characteristics of each property within the portfolio, e.g., age, location, amenities, target demographic. Targets should be smart, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and clearly communicated to all stakeholders. This approach is ethically sound as it promotes transparency and accountability, and it is regulatory compliant by ensuring that performance expectations are grounded in objective reality and industry best practices, avoiding misleading or unattainable goals. Incorrect approaches analysis. Setting benchmarks based solely on anecdotal evidence or the highest performer in a different market segment is an ethically flawed approach. It lacks objectivity and can lead to unrealistic expectations, potentially causing staff burnout and dissatisfaction if targets are perceived as unattainable. This can also lead to decisions that prioritize short-term gains over long-term portfolio health, which may indirectly violate fiduciary duties or fair housing regulations if certain resident groups are disproportionately affected by aggressive revenue-generating strategies. Establishing targets that are purely aspirational without considering operational capacity or market realities is also problematic. While ambition is good, targets must be grounded in feasibility. Unrealistic targets can lead to corner-cutting in maintenance, resident services, or compliance, potentially creating legal liabilities or reputational damage. This approach fails to uphold the professional responsibility to manage properties effectively and ethically. Focusing exclusively on maximizing revenue without considering resident retention or satisfaction metrics is another flawed strategy. While revenue is a key performance indicator, neglecting resident experience can lead to increased turnover, higher marketing costs, and potential legal disputes arising from resident complaints or perceived neglect. This can indirectly contravene regulations related to habitability and resident rights. Professional reasoning. A CAPS professional should approach benchmark and target setting through a systematic process. This begins with a comprehensive review of the portfolio's current performance and the broader market landscape. Data analysis, including occupancy rates, rent collection, operating expenses, resident satisfaction surveys, and market rent comparables, is crucial. Benchmarks should then be established based on this data, reflecting industry standards and competitive positioning. Performance targets should be derived from these benchmarks, tailored to the specific goals of the portfolio and individual properties, ensuring they are challenging yet attainable. Regular review and adjustment of these benchmarks and targets are essential to adapt to changing market conditions and portfolio performance. Transparency in communicating these benchmarks and targets, along with the rationale behind them, to the team fosters buy-in and accountability. Question 2. The monitoring system demonstrates that two apartment portfolios, managed by different teams but under the same overarching ownership, are being evaluated for performance. Portfolio A's financial statements are prepared using a method that recognizes revenue and expenses when earned or incurred, regardless of cash receipt or disbursement. Portfolio B's financial statements are prepared using a method that recognizes revenue only when cash is received and expenses only when cash is paid, which approach provides a more accurate and comparable basis for analyzing the financial performance and position of these apartment portfolios for strategic decision-making. Option A. A hybrid approach that combines elements of both cash and accrual accounting, tailored to each portfolio's specific needs. Option B. The method used for Portfolio B, as it directly reflects the cash available to the portfolios. Option C. The method used for Portfolio B, as it is simpler to understand and requires less complex record-keeping. Option D. The method used for Portfolio A, as it adheres to accrual accounting principles, providing a more comprehensive view of economic events. The correct answer is D. The method used for Portfolio A, as it adheres to accrual accounting principles, providing a more comprehensive view of economic events. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a CAPS professional to interpret financial statements beyond simple numerical accuracy. The challenge lies in understanding the implications of different reporting methods on the perceived financial health and operational efficiency of apartment portfolios, especially when comparing them. Adhering to the Certified Apartment Portfolio Supervisor (CAPS) standards means prioritizing transparency, accuracy, and the ethical presentation of financial information to stakeholders, which includes owners, investors, and potentially lenders. The CAPS designation implies a commitment to upholding industry best practices and regulatory compliance, which are paramount in financial reporting. The correct approach involves selecting the financial reporting method that most accurately reflects the economic reality of the apartment portfolio's operations and financial position, while adhering to generally accepted accounting principles (GAAP) or relevant industry standards for the specified jurisdiction. This method would allow for a clear, consistent, and comparable analysis of performance over time and against benchmarks. For instance, using accrual accounting and consistently applying revenue recognition principles ensures that income and expenses are recorded when earned or incurred, regardless of cash flow timing, providing a truer picture of profitability. This aligns with the ethical obligation to present financial information truthfully and without misleading implications, as expected of a CAPS professional. An incorrect approach would be to choose a reporting method that, while potentially simpler or more favorable in the short term, obscures the true financial performance or position. For example, using cash basis accounting when accrual accounting is more appropriate for the portfolio's complexity could misrepresent profitability by not accounting for outstanding receivables or payables. This failure to accurately reflect economic events constitutes a breach of professional ethics and potentially regulatory guidelines that mandate fair and accurate financial reporting. Another incorrect approach might involve selectively applying accounting methods or making arbitrary adjustments that distort financial results to present a more favorable, but ultimately misleading, picture. This violates the principle of transparency and could lead to poor investment or management decisions based on flawed data. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the portfolio's operational characteristics, the purpose of the financial reporting, e.g., internal management, investor reporting, loan applications, and the applicable accounting standards. A CAPS professional should always prioritize the method that offers the most transparent, accurate, and comparable representation of financial performance and position, even if it requires more effort or presents less flattering results. Consulting with accounting professionals or reviewing industry best practices can further inform the decision. Question 3. Regulatory review indicates that a large apartment portfolio requires significant capital infusion for property upgrades and to manage existing debt obligations. The portfolio supervisor is evaluating several financing options, including a short-term bridge loan with a variable interest rate and high origination fees, a long-term fixed-rate mortgage with restrictive covenants on property operations, and a securitized loan package that offers a competitive initial rate but includes complex repayment triggers tied to market performance. Which approach best aligns with responsible debt management and regulatory compliance for CAP's designation holder? Option A. Pursue the securitized loan package, carefully analyzing the market performance triggers and ensuring the portfolio's operational capacity can withstand potential adjustments, while also conducting thorough due diligence on the lender's compliance history. Option B. Accept the long-term fixed-rate mortgage, focusing on the stability of the fixed rate and deferring detailed examination of the operational covenants until they become an immediate issue. Option C. Prioritize the short-term bridge loan due to its perceived flexibility, despite the higher fees and variable rate, as it allows for immediate access to funds. Option D. Seek a combination of the bridge loan and the fixed-rate mortgage to diversify immediate and long-term financing needs, without fully assessing the combined impact on cash flow and covenant compliance. The correct answer is A. Pursue the securitized loan package, carefully analyzing the market performance triggers and ensuring the portfolio's operational capacity can withstand potential adjustments, while also conducting thorough due diligence on the lender's compliance history. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a portfolio supervisor to balance the immediate need for capital with long-term financial health and regulatory compliance. The decision involves assessing various debt instruments, each with distinct risk profiles, repayment structures, and implications for the portfolio's overall financial stability and adherence to fair lending practices. The supervisor must navigate these complexities while ensuring all financing decisions align with the certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAP's, ethical standards, and relevant U.S. federal and state housing regulations. The correct approach involves a thorough due diligence process that prioritizes the long-term financial viability of the portfolio in compliance with all applicable regulations. This includes evaluating the debt's impact on cash flow, debt service coverage ratios, and the potential for future refinancing. It also necessitates ensuring that the terms of any financing are fair, transparent, and do not create undue risk for the portfolio or its residents, aligning with principles of responsible lending and fiduciary duty. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on securing the lowest interest rate without considering the loan's covenants or maturity date is problematic. This could lead to future liquidity crises if the portfolio cannot meet restrictive covenants or if refinancing becomes difficult or prohibitively expensive. Another incorrect approach that involves accepting a loan with aggressive repayment terms that strain current cash flow, even if it offers a seemingly attractive initial rate, jeopardizes the portfolio's operational stability and its ability to maintain properties and provide resident services, potentially violating fiduciary responsibilities. Furthermore, pursuing financing that involves opaque fee structures or terms that could be construed as predatory or discriminatory would violate fair lending laws and ethical standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the portfolio's financial objectives and constraints. This should be followed by a comprehensive analysis of all available financing options, assessing not just the cost, but also the risk, flexibility, and long-term impact on the portfolio's performance and compliance. Engaging with legal and financial advisors to scrutinize loan documents and ensure alignment with regulatory requirements is crucial. Finally, a decision should be made based on a holistic evaluation that prioritizes sustainability, compliance, and the best interests of the portfolio and its stakeholders. Question 4. Consider a scenario where a certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS, is tasked with developing new portfolio-level objectives for a diverse portfolio of residential properties located across different submarkets. The portfolio's primary investor has expressed a desire for increased net operating income, NOI, and improved resident retention rates. The CAPS must consider the unique market conditions, property types, and operational challenges of each asset while setting overarching goals for the entire portfolio, Which of the following approaches best aligns with the professional responsibilities and ethical considerations for a CAPS in this situation? Option A. Conduct a thorough analysis of each property's performance against its local market comparables, assess current economic conditions, and then formulate portfolio-level objectives that are realistic, measurable, and directly support the investor's stated goals for NOI growth and resident retention, while also considering long-term asset value and regulatory compliance. Option B. Set portfolio-level objectives based on the personal experience and intuition of the CAPS regarding market trends, without consulting property-level managers or reviewing detailed financial performance data for each asset. Option C. Develop portfolio-level objectives by aggregating the highest historical NOI growth rates achieved by individual properties and setting a uniform, aggressive retention target based on industry averages, without detailed analysis of current market conditions or property-specific operational constraints. Option D. Prioritize immediate rent increases across all properties to quickly boost NOI, assuming that resident retention will naturally follow if the properties are well maintained, and defer detailed market analysis until after the new objectives are implemented. The correct answer is C. Develop portfolio-level objectives by aggregating the highest historical NOI growth rates achieved by individual properties and setting a uniform, aggressive retention target based on industry averages, without detailed analysis of current market conditions or property-specific operational constraints. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because developing portfolio-level objectives requires balancing diverse property performance, market conditions, and investor expectations within the constraints of regulatory compliance and ethical fiduciary duties. A CAPS professional must synthesize complex information to set achievable yet ambitious goals that align with the overall investment strategy. The challenge lies in translating broad financial targets into actionable operational objectives that can be effectively managed across multiple properties, each with its unique characteristics and challenges. The correct approach involves a data-driven, holistic assessment of each property's performance against market benchmarks and the portfolio's overarching financial goals. This includes analyzing key performance indicators, KPI, such as occupancy rates, rental income growth, operating expenses, and resident satisfaction. Portfolio-level objectives should then be formulated to address identified opportunities and risks, ensuring alignment with the investment strategy and regulatory requirements for reporting and disclosure. This approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes informed decision-making, transparency, and responsible asset management, fulfilling the fiduciary duty to the property owner or investor. It also adheres to industry best practices and potential regulatory guidelines that emphasize prudent management and accurate performance reporting. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing short-term rental income without considering long-term asset value or resident retention would be ethically problematic. This could lead to aggressive rent increases that violate fair housing regulations or lead to increased resident turnover, ultimately harming the portfolio's stability and profitability. Another incorrect approach that neglects to account for local market dynamics or economic downturns would set unrealistic objectives, potentially leading to underperformance and misrepresentation of expected returns to investors. This demonstrates a failure in due diligence and responsible financial planning. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses thorough market analysis and competitor benchmarking to simply replicate past strategies without adaptation would be a failure to meet the evolving needs of the market and could lead to competitive disadvantage and missed opportunities, violating the principle of diligent management. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive review of the portfolio's current state and historical performance. This should be followed by an in-depth analysis of external factors, including market trends, economic conditions, and regulatory changes. Objectives should then be developed collaboratively, ensuring they are SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and directly support the overarching investment strategy. Regular performance monitoring and adaptive strategy adjustments are crucial to ensure objectives remain relevant and achievable throughout the portfolio's lifecycle. Question 5. Process analysis reveals that a property portfolio is experiencing stable occupancy, but a decline in its net operating income, NOI, over the past 2 fiscal years. The property management team proposes a series of significant capital expenditures aimed at modernizing common areas and upgrading unit interiors. Anticipating these improvements will justify future rent increases. As a certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS, which of the following approaches best demonstrates a comprehensive financial impact assessment for decision-making? Option A. Prioritize deferring all non-essential capital expenditures to preserve immediate cash flow, even if it means delaying necessary upgrades that could enhance tenant appeal and long-term value. Option B. Focus solely on the projected increase in gross rental income that the proposed capital expenditures are expected to generate, assuming these improvements will automatically lead to higher profitability. Option C. Evaluate the projected return on investment (ROI) for each proposed capital expenditure, considering the anticipated increase in rental income and the estimated lifespan of the improvements, alongside a review of the current NOI trends and the property's overall financial health. Option D. Measure the success of the proposed capital expenditures primarily by the increase in occupancy rates following their completion, regardless of the actual impact on net income or return on investment. The correct answer is C. Evaluate the projected return on investment (ROI) for each proposed capital expenditure, considering the anticipated increase in rental income and the estimated lifespan of the improvements, alongside a review of the current NOI trends and the property's overall financial health. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a portfolio supervisor to evaluate the financial performance of a property beyond simple revenue generation, considering the impact of capital expenditures on long-term value and investor returns. The challenge lies in balancing immediate operational efficiency with strategic investment decisions that affect the overall profitability and marketability of the asset. Careful judgment is required to ensure that financial metrics accurately reflect the true economic performance and align with investor expectations and fiduciary duties. The correct approach involves analyzing the net operating income (NOI) in conjunction with the return on investment (ROI) for specific capital projects. This method provides a comprehensive view by first assessing the property's operational profitability (NOI) and then evaluating the efficiency of capital deployed to enhance that profitability or asset value (ROI). This aligns with the fiduciary responsibility of a CAPS professional to maximize investor returns while maintaining the asset's long-term viability. Regulatory frameworks for real estate investment and property management emphasize transparency and accurate financial reporting, which this approach supports by providing a clear link between investment and return. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on increasing gross rental income without considering the associated operating expenses or the cost of capital improvements. This overlooks the impact of operational efficiency and investment returns, potentially leading to decisions that inflate short-term revenue but degrade long-term profitability or asset value. Such a focus can violate ethical obligations to act in the best interest of the owner and may misrepresent the true financial health of the portfolio to stakeholders. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize minimizing immediate capital expenditures to boost short-term cash flow, even if these expenditures are necessary for property maintenance or value enhancement. This neglects the potential for these investments to generate future returns and could lead to deferred maintenance, decreased tenant satisfaction, and a decline in the property's market value, ultimately harming the investor's long-term financial interests. This approach fails to uphold the duty of prudent asset management. A third incorrect approach would be to rely solely on occupancy rates as a primary indicator of financial success, without correlating it to profitability or return on investment. High occupancy achieved through unsustainable rent concessions or neglecting necessary property upgrades does not necessarily translate to strong financial performance. This overlooks the core objective of generating a positive financial return for the investor and can lead to a misallocation of resources. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted financial analysis that considers both operational performance, e.g., NOI, and investment performance, e.g., ROI on capital projects. It requires understanding the investor's goals, market conditions, and the long-term implications of financial decisions. Professionals should always strive for transparency, accuracy, and a holistic view of the asset's financial health, ensuring that all decisions are ethically sound and legally compliant within the applicable regulatory framework. Question 6. The investigation demonstrates that a portfolio of apartment properties is experiencing a noticeable decline in net operating income (NOI) over the past 2 quarters. While overall occupancy remains stable, resident retention rates have slightly decreased, and resident satisfaction scores have dipped in the most recent survey. The property management team has proposed several immediate actions to address this trend. Which of the following approaches represents the most effective and professionally responsible method for a certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS, to monitor property performance and operational efficiency in this situation? Option A. Conduct a detailed analysis of the marketing and leasing expenses to determine if increased spending is yielding a proportional increase in new resident acquisition and overall revenue. Option B. Initiate a review of resident feedback, maintenance request logs, and utility consumption reports to identify specific operational inefficiencies or resident concerns contributing to the declining performance. Option C. Focus solely on increasing rental rates across all properties to offset the decrease in NOI, assuming market demand will absorb the increases. Option D. Immediately implement a company-wide freeze on all non-essential operational expenditures, including maintenance and staff training, to stem the decline in NOI. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed analysis of the marketing and leasing expenses to determine if increased spending is yielding a proportional increase in new resident acquisition and overall revenue. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for a certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS, where a property's operational efficiency appears to be declining, necessitating a thorough review of performance metrics. The professional challenge lies in accurately diagnosing the root cause of the decline without jumping to premature conclusions or implementing ineffective solutions. It requires a systematic approach grounded in data analysis and adherence to industry best practices, which are implicitly guided by the ethical and professional standards expected of a CAPS designation. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of multiple performance indicators, including financial statements, operational reports, tenant satisfaction surveys, and maintenance logs. This holistic examination allows for the identification of specific areas of underperformance, such as increased utility costs, higher vacancy rates, or a rise in resident complaints. By cross-referencing these data points, CAPS can pinpoint whether the issue stems from management practices, market conditions, property condition, or a combination thereof. This methodical process aligns with the CAP's responsibility to ensure properties are managed effectively and profitably, upholding the fiduciary duty to owners and investors. It also reflects the ethical imperative to make informed decisions based on objective evidence. An incorrect approach would be to immediately attribute the decline solely to increased marketing expenses, without a detailed analysis of their return on investment, or to focus exclusively on reducing maintenance costs, without considering the potential impact on resident satisfaction and long-term asset preservation. Another incorrect approach is to implement broad cost-cutting measures across all departments without identifying specific areas of inefficiency. These approaches fail to address the underlying issues, potentially exacerbating the problem or leading to unintended negative consequences. For instance, cutting maintenance without understanding its necessity could lead to deferred maintenance, increasing future costs and negatively impacting resident retention. Similarly, assuming marketing is the sole culprit without analyzing its effectiveness ignores other potential drivers of performance decline. These actions demonstrate a lack of due diligence and a failure to apply sound management principles, which are fundamental to the CAPS designation. Professionals should approach such situations by first establishing clear performance benchmarks. Then, they should gather and analyze relevant data from various sources, looking for trends and anomalies. The next step is to form hypotheses about the causes of underperformance and test these hypotheses through further investigation. Finally, based on the evidence, develop and implement targeted solutions, continuously monitoring their effectiveness. This systematic, data-driven decision-making process ensures that actions are strategic, efficient, and aligned with the overall goals of property management and investment. Question 7. The analysis reveals that rising inflation and increasing interest rates are creating a challenging economic environment. As a certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS, What is the most prudent approach to identifying and assessing the portfolio-level risks associated with these macroeconomic shifts? Option A. Monitor local market news for any isolated negative reports that might indicate localized issues within specific submarkets where the portfolio operates. Option B. Analyze how the current inflationary pressures and interest rate hikes are likely to affect rental demand, operating expenses, and property valuations across the entire portfolio, and assess the portfolio's diversification and market resilience. Option C. Implement immediate, across-the-board rent increases and cost-cutting measures across all properties to proactively offset potential financial impacts. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of each property's individual financial performance and operational efficiency to identify any immediate operational shortfalls. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of each property's individual financial performance and operational efficiency to identify any immediate operational shortfalls. Explanation: the analysis reveals a common challenge for a certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS, where a portfolio's performance is influenced by external economic shifts. The professional challenge lies in distinguishing between systemic, portfolio-wide risks that require strategic adjustments and localized issues that can be managed at the property level. A CAPS must demonstrate foresight and a proactive approach to risk management, aligning with the ethical obligation to protect investor interests and maintain the long-term viability of the assets under their supervision. This requires a deep understanding of market dynamics and the ability to translate broad economic indicators into actionable portfolio strategies. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment of how macroeconomic trends, such as interest rate fluctuations or shifts in consumer spending, directly impact rental demand, operating costs, and property valuations across the entire portfolio. This includes evaluating the portfolio's diversification, the resilience of its target markets, and the potential for adverse economic conditions to trigger a cascade of negative effects. Regulatory frameworks for CAPS emphasize prudent management and fiduciary responsibility, which necessitates anticipating and mitigating such broad-reaching risks. This approach aligns with the principle of acting in the best interest of the stakeholders by safeguarding the portfolio's overall health and value. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on individual property performance metrics without considering the overarching economic context. This fails to acknowledge that a downturn in a specific market might be a symptom of a larger economic problem affecting multiple properties. Such a narrow focus could lead to misallocated resources, ineffective strategies, and a failure to adequately prepare the portfolio for widespread challenges. It also neglects the CAP's responsibility to provide a holistic view of portfolio risk to stakeholders. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the identified economic trends as temporary or irrelevant to the specific portfolio. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and an unwillingness to adapt to changing market conditions. It can lead to a reactive rather than proactive risk management strategy, potentially resulting in significant financial losses when the economic impact becomes undeniable. This approach violates the ethical duty to exercise sound professional judgment and to stay informed about factors that could materially affect the portfolio. A third incorrect approach is to overreact to every minor economic fluctuation by implementing drastic, across-the-board changes without a thorough analysis of their specific impact on different segments of the portfolio. This can lead to unnecessary operational disruptions, increased costs, and a loss of focus on more critical, long-term strategic objectives. It suggests a lack of nuanced understanding of risk assessment and mitigation, potentially harming the portfolio through poorly conceived interventions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This begins with identifying potential portfolio-level risks, categorizing them e.g., economic, market, operational, and then evaluating their likelihood and potential impact. For economic risks, this means analyzing relevant macroeconomic data, understanding its implications for the portfolio's specific markets and asset classes, and developing mitigation strategies that are tailored to the portfolio's unique characteristics. Regular review and adjustment of these strategies based on evolving economic conditions are crucial. Question 8. Market research demonstrates a growing trend in resident-issued complaints regarding HVAC system performance during extreme weather events. As a certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS overseeing a portfolio of properties across multiple U.S. states. Which of the following process optimization strategies for risk assessment and mitigation would be most aligned with regulatory expectations and professional best practices? Option A. Rely on resident-reported issues as the primary trigger for HVAC maintenance, addressing problems on a case-by-case basis as they arise to minimize immediate operational costs. Option B. Mandate immediate replacement of all HVAC units older than 10 years, regardless of their current performance or maintenance history, to preemptively eliminate potential issues. Option C. Implement a comprehensive, proactive HVAC system inspection and preventative maintenance program across all properties, prioritizing upgrades or replacements for units identified as high risk based on age, maintenance history, and performance data, and establishing clear protocols for emergency response during extreme weather. Option D. Reduce the frequency of routine HVAC inspections to allocate more resources towards cosmetic upgrades that have historically shown a higher return on investment in resident satisfaction surveys. The correct answer is C. Implement a comprehensive, proactive HVAC system inspection and preventative maintenance program across all properties, prioritizing upgrades or replacements for units identified as high risk based on age, maintenance history, and performance data, and establishing clear protocols for emergency response during extreme weather. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a portfolio supervisor to balance the need for proactive risk management with the practical constraints of operational efficiency and financial prudence, all while adhering to the specific regulatory framework governing apartment portfolios in the United States. The pressure to optimize processes for risk mitigation can sometimes conflict with immediate cost-saving measures or established operational routines, demanding a nuanced and well-justified approach. Careful judgment is required to identify risks that are material and actionable, and to implement mitigation strategies that are both effective and economically viable, without compromising resident safety or regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves a systematic and data-driven assessment of potential risks, followed by the development and implementation of targeted mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of prudent property management and the overarching regulatory expectation to maintain safe and compliant living environments. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to identifying and addressing potential hazards before they escalate into significant liabilities or regulatory violations. This proactive stance is often implicitly or explicitly encouraged by regulatory bodies and industry best practices, as it demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and responsible portfolio oversight. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without a thorough risk assessment fails to uphold the fiduciary duty to protect the asset and its residents. This can lead to overlooking critical safety issues, potentially resulting in accidents, legal liabilities, and regulatory penalties. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes implementing every conceivable mitigation strategy without considering its cost-effectiveness or likelihood of occurrence can lead to inefficient resource allocation and unnecessary operational burdens, potentially diverting resources from more pressing risks. Furthermore, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal opinion rather than objective data for risk identification and mitigation strategy selection is unprofessional and can lead to misallocation of resources and ineffective risk management, potentially violating the duty of care owed to residents and owners. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive risk identification process, utilizing data from inspection, resident feedback, incident reports, and market trends. This should be followed by a qualitative and quantitative assessment of the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. Mitigation strategies should then be developed, prioritizing those that offer the best risk reduction for the investment. The selection and implementation of these strategies must be documented, with clear metrics for evaluating their effectiveness. Regular review and adaptation of the risk management plan are essential to ensure ongoing relevance and efficacy in response to changing conditions and regulatory landscapes. Question 9. To address the challenge of aligning diverse stakeholder expectations with measurable performance objectives for a multifamily apartment portfolio, which approach to setting key performance indicators, KPI, best balances financial returns, resident satisfaction, and operational sustainability while adhering to ethical and regulatory frameworks. Option A. Prioritize KPIs that solely focus on maximizing short-term revenue and occupancy rates, even if it means reducing maintenance budgets or increasing resident fees significantly. Option B. Establish KPIs centered on aggressive cost-cutting measures to boost operational efficiency, potentially impacting staffing levels and response times for resident issues. Option C. Set highly ambitious, aspirational KPIs that push operational teams to their limits, without necessarily grounding them in current market realities or achievable operational capacity. Option D. Develop KPIs collaboratively with all key stakeholders, ensuring they are smart and reflect a balanced perspective on financial performance, resident experience, and operational efficiency. The correct answer is D. Develop KPIs collaboratively with all key stakeholders, ensuring they are smart and reflect a balanced perspective on financial performance, resident experience, and operational efficiency. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in portfolio management, aligning diverse stakeholder expectations with measurable performance objectives. The professional challenge lies in translating broad strategic goals into specific, actionable, and universally understood key performance indicators, KPI, that satisfy the varying interests of owners, investors, and operational teams. This requires a nuanced understanding of how different metrics impact financial returns, asset value, resident satisfaction, and operational efficiency, all within the bounds of ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure KPIs are not only achievable, but also contribute to the long-term health and profitability of the portfolio, avoiding short-sighted targets that could lead to regulatory issues or reputational damage. The correct approach involves collaboratively defining KPIs that are smart, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and directly linked to the overarching investment strategy and fiduciary duties. This approach prioritizes transparency and buy-in from all key stakeholders, ensuring that the chosen metrics reflect a balanced perspective. For instance, including KPIs related to resident retention and satisfaction alongside financial metrics demonstrates an understanding that a positive living experience contributes to long-term value and reduces turnover costs, which aligns with ethical property management practices and can indirectly support compliance with fair housing regulations by fostering a well-maintained and responsive environment. This collaborative and holistic method ensures that KPIs are not only effective, but also ethically sound and legally defensible, as they are rooted in a shared understanding of objectives and responsibilities. An approach that solely focuses on maximizing short-term revenue without considering resident satisfaction or property condition fails to uphold fiduciary duties. This can lead to neglecting essential maintenance, which could violate lease agreements and local housing codes, creating legal liabilities. Furthermore, prioritizing aggressive rent increases without regard for market conditions or resident affordability can lead to increased vacancies and potential fair housing complaints if perceived as discriminatory. An approach that emphasizes operational efficiency to the detriment of resident experience, such as cutting back on essential staff or response times for maintenance requests, can lead to a decline in resident satisfaction and an increase in negative online reviews. This can indirectly impact property value and create a hostile living environment, potentially leading to legal disputes over habitability. Such a narrow focus also risks overlooking regulatory requirements related to property maintenance and resident communication. An approach that sets ambitious but unrealistic targets without considering market realities or operational capacity is also problematic. This can lead to staff burnout, a decline in service quality, and ultimately failure to meet objectives, which can erode investor confidence and potentially lead to accusations of misrepresentation if targets were presented as achievable without proper due diligence. This can also create pressure to cut corners, potentially leading to regulatory noncompliance. The professional decision-making process for setting KPIs should begin with a thorough understanding of the portfolio's strategic objectives and the expectations of all stakeholders. This involves open communication and data gathering to identify key drivers of success. KPIs should then be developed collaboratively, ensuring they are smart and aligned with ethical principles and regulatory requirements. Regular review and adjustment of KPIs based on performance data and evolving market conditions are crucial for sustained success and responsible portfolio management. Question 10. The review process indicates a pattern of inconsistent applicant screening across several properties within the portfolio, with anecdotal reports suggesting that leasing agents may be making subjective judgments about potential residents based on factors not explicitly outlined in the written screening criteria. As a certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action to ensure adherence to fair housing laws? Option A. Wait for formal complaints to be filed regarding discriminatory practices before initiating any corrective actions, as this provides concrete evidence of a violation. Option B. Issue a general reminder to all staff about the importance of fair housing and instruct them to be more careful when screening applicants, relying on their best judgment to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Option C. Focus on increasing marketing efforts to attract a wider pool of applicants, assuming that a larger applicant pool will naturally mitigate any potential screening biases. Option D. Immediately implement a mandatory, comprehensive fair housing training program for all leasing and management staff, coupled with a thorough review and revision of all property-level screening policies and procedures to ensure they are objective, consistently applied, and clearly prohibit discrimination based on any protected characteristic. Correct answer is D. Immediately implement a mandatory, comprehensive fair housing training program for all leasing and management staff, coupled with a thorough review and revision of all property-level screening policies and procedures to ensure they are objective, consistently applied, and clearly prohibit discrimination based on any protected characteristic. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a portfolio supervisor to balance the operational needs of a property with the absolute legal and ethical imperative to comply with fair housing laws. The pressure to maintain occupancy rates and meet financial targets can create a temptation to overlook or rationalize practices that might inadvertently lead to discrimination. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all decisions and actions are grounded in a thorough understanding of fair housing regulations and ethical best practices, prioritizing legal compliance and resident well-being over short-term operational gains. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and addressing potential fair housing risks through comprehensive training and policy review. This demonstrates a commitment to upholding fair housing principles by equipping staff with the knowledge to prevent discriminatory practices and by establishing clear, legally compliant procedures. This approach is right because it aligns directly with the core tenets of the Fair Housing Act, FHA, and its implementing regulations, which prohibit discrimination in housing based on protected characteristics. By fostering a culture of compliance and providing ongoing education, the portfolio supervisor ensures that the property operates within legal boundaries and ethical standards, minimizing the risk of complaints and litigation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on responding to complaints after they arise is professionally unacceptable. This reactive stance fails to prevent discrimination and suggests a lack of commitment to fair housing principles. It is ethically problematic because it allows potential harm to individuals to occur before any action is taken. Legally, it exposes the portfolio to significant liability, as the FHA mandates proactive measures to prevent discrimination, not just reactive responses. Another incorrect approach that involves relying on anecdotal evidence or personal interpretations of fair housing laws is also professionally unacceptable. This is dangerous because it is subjective and prone to bias, leading to inconsistent and potentially discriminatory application of policies. Fair housing laws are complex and require adherence to specific legal standards, not personal opinions. This approach risks violating the FHA by failing to implement objective, legally sound practices. Third incorrect approach that prioritizes filling vacancies quickly without a thorough review of applicant qualifications and screening processes is professionally unacceptable. This can lead to discriminatory screening practices, even if unintentional. The FHA requires that all applicants be treated equally and that screening criteria be applied consistently and without regard to protected characteristics. This approach creates a high risk of disparate impact claims, where a seemingly neutral policy has a discriminatory effect on a protected group. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of all applicable fair housing laws and regulations. This involves staying current with legal updates and guidance from regulatory bodies. Next, A proactive risk assessment should be conducted to identify potential areas of noncompliance within current operations and policies. This should be followed by the development and implementation of clear, written policies and procedures that explicitly address fair housing requirements. Crucially, ongoing, comprehensive training for all staff involved in leasing, management, and resident relations is essential. Finally, regular audits and reviews of leasing and management practices should be performed to ensure continued compliance and to identify any emerging issues. Question 11. What factors determine the most effective market analysis approach for adjusting an apartment portfolio's strategic direction in response to evolving economic conditions and local supply/demand dynamics? Option A. An evaluation based solely on the internal operational efficiencies and cost-saving measures implemented within the existing portfolio assets. Option B. A comparative analysis of current and projected rental rates, vacancy trends, absorption rates, new construction pipelines, and demographic shifts across relevant submarkets. Option C. An assessment focused primarily on maximizing immediate rental income through aggressive pricing strategies, irrespective of broader market saturation. Option D. A review of the portfolio's historical performance metrics and past successful investment strategies without significant consideration of current market conditions. The correct answer is B. A comparative analysis of current and projected rental rates, vacancy trends, absorption rates, new construction pipelines, and demographic shifts across relevant submarkets. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because a portfolio supervisor must balance the need for aggressive growth with the fiduciary duty to protect investor capital. Misinterpreting market analysis can lead to suboptimal investment decisions, impacting both profitability and risk exposure. The CAPS designation implies a responsibility to apply best practices in real estate investment and portfolio management, adhering to industry standards and ethical conduct. The correct approach involves a comprehensive comparative analysis of market trends, economic indicators, and competitive landscapes to inform strategic decisions. This aligns with the CAPS curriculum's emphasis on data-driven decision-making and risk management. Specifically, it requires evaluating current and projected rental rates, vacancy rates, absorption rates, construction pipelines, and demographic shifts within specific submarkets. This detailed understanding allows for the identification of opportunities for value-add or stabilization, and the assessment of potential risks associated with oversupply or declining demand. Regulatory and ethical justification stems from the principle of prudent investment management, ensuring that strategies are grounded in objective market realities rather than speculation or anecdotal evidence. This approach upholds the responsibility to act in the best interest of the portfolio's stakeholders. An approach that relies solely on historical performance data without considering current market dynamics is professionally flawed. While historical data provides context, it does not guarantee future results and can be misleading in a changing market. This failure to adapt strategy to current conditions can lead to misallocation of capital and missed opportunities, violating the duty of care. An approach that prioritizes short-term gains over long-term portfolio health is also ethically problematic. While profitability is a key objective, it must be achieved through sustainable strategies. Focusing exclusively on immediate returns without assessing the underlying market fundamentals can expose the portfolio to undue risk and jeopardize its long-term viability, contravening the fiduciary responsibility to preserve and grow capital prudently. An approach that ignores the competitive landscape and focuses only on internal portfolio metrics is incomplete. Understanding competitor strategies, pricing, and product offerings is crucial for effective positioning and pricing of assets within the portfolio. Neglecting this external factor can lead to a loss of market share and reduced competitiveness, impacting overall portfolio performance. Professional decision-making in this context requires a systematic process. First, gathering and analyzing a wide range of relevant market data. Second, comparing this data across different submarkets and asset classes. Third, identifying key trends and potential risks and opportunities. And finally, developing a strategic plan that is responsive to the analyzed market conditions and aligned with the portfolio's investment objectives and risk tolerance. Question 12. The control framework reveals that while the portfolio has consistently met its financial targets over the past 3 years, there has been a lack of formal, documented risk assessment procedures, for identifying and evaluating potential operational and market-related threats across the diverse apartment properties within the portfolio. Which approach to risk assessment best aligns with regulatory expectations and professional best practices for a certified apartment portfolio supervisor? Option A. Conducting a superficial review of industry news and competitor performance to identify potential risks without a structured internal evaluation. Option B. Relying on the subjective assessments of individual property managers and historical performance data to gauge the overall risk profile of the portfolio. Option C. Focusing exclusively on cost-saving measures and operational efficiencies, assuming that a well-managed portfolio inherently minimizes risk. Option D. Implementing a comprehensive risk assessment process that systematically identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes potential risks, developing mitigation strategies, and regularly reviewing the assessment. The correct answer is D. Implementing a comprehensive risk assessment process that systematically identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes potential risks, developing mitigation strategies, and regularly reviewing the assessment. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a portfolio supervisor to balance the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term imperative of robust risk management, all within the confines of regulatory compliance. The pressure to demonstrate positive financial performance can sometimes overshadow the systematic identification and mitigation of potential threats. A portfolio supervisor must exercise sound judgment to ensure that risk assessment is not merely a procedural step, but an integral part of strategic decision-making. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and assessing potential risks across the portfolio, considering their likelihood and impact, and then developing appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with the fundamental principles of responsible portfolio management, which are often implicitly or explicitly supported by regulatory frameworks designed to protect investors and ensure market stability. For instance, in the U.S., regulations like those promulgated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, for investment advisors emphasize the duty of care, which includes a thorough understanding and management of risks associated with the assets under management. Ethical guidelines for financial professionals also stress the importance of diligence and prudence in safeguarding client assets. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical performance data without considering emerging market trends or operational vulnerabilities fails to meet the standard of due diligence. This oversight can lead to significant financial losses if unforeseen events occur, potentially violating fiduciary duties and regulatory expectations for proactive risk management. Another incorrect approach, which prioritizes cost reduction over comprehensive risk assessment, is also professionally unacceptable. While efficiency is important, cutting corners on risk identification and mitigation can create systemic weaknesses that are far more costly to address in the long run. This approach neglects the regulatory requirement to manage portfolios prudently and ethically, potentially exposing the portfolio to unacceptable levels of risk. A third incorrect approach, which relies on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few key individuals without a structured assessment process, lacks the rigor demanded by professional standards and regulatory oversight. This can lead to biased risk perception and the overlooking of critical threats that a systematic evaluation would uncover. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment methodology. This includes defining the scope of the assessment, identifying potential risks, both internal and external, analyzing the likelihood and impact of each risk, evaluating existing controls, and developing a plan for risk mitigation or acceptance. This process should be documented and regularly reviewed to ensure its continued relevance and effectiveness, thereby fulfilling regulatory obligations and upholding ethical standards. Question 13. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new tiered rent structure based on unit amenities and recent renovation status could significantly increase average rental income and occupancy rates. However, this strategy might also lead to a perception of inequity among long-term residents if their units are not upgraded. Which approach best balances financial optimization with ethical and regulatory considerations for a CAPS professional? Option A. Focus solely on increasing rents across the entire portfolio by a predetermined percentage, irrespective of unit condition or market demand, to achieve immediate revenue targets. Option B. Prioritize filling all vacant units at the current market rate, even if it means offering substantial move-in incentives to maximize occupancy before considering any rent adjustments or renovations. Option C. Conduct a thorough market analysis of comparable properties to establish fair market rents for different amenity tiers. Develop a phased renovation plan to ensure equitable upgrade opportunities, and communicate the proposed rent structure and renovation timeline transparently to all residents well in advance of implementation. Option D. Implement the tiered rent structure immediately, focusing marketing efforts on new and renovated units to drive occupancy and revenue, while addressing resident concerns on a case-by-case basis after the new structure is in place. The correct answer is D. Implement the tiered rent structure immediately, focusing marketing efforts on new and renovated units to drive occupancy and revenue, while addressing resident concerns on a case-by-case basis after the new structure is in place. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a portfolio supervisor to balance the financial goals of property owners with the ethical obligations to residents and regulatory compliance. Analyzing occupancy rates and rent growth is a core function, but the pressure to achieve specific financial targets can lead to decisions that may inadvertently violate fair housing laws or create unsustainable market conditions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that strategies for increasing occupancy and rent are implemented ethically and legally. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of market comparables, economic indicators, and resident retention strategies to inform rent adjustments and marketing efforts. This approach is right because it aligns with the principles of responsible property management and the implied duty of care to both owners and residents. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit of fair housing regulations by ensuring that rent increases are based on objective market factors and not discriminatory practices. Furthermore, focusing on resident retention through improved services and amenities demonstrates a commitment to long-term portfolio health, which is often a fiduciary responsibility. This method promotes sustainable growth by addressing both supply and demand dynamics in a responsible manner. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on aggressive rent increases without considering market absorption rates or resident feedback is ethically flawed. This can lead to increased vacancy, higher turnover costs, and potential accusations of price gouging or discriminatory pricing, if not applied uniformly and justified by market data. Such an approach risks violating consumer protection laws and damaging the portfolio's reputation. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes filling vacancies at any cost, even if it means offering unsustainable concessions or significantly lowering rental rates below market value, is also professionally unsound. While it may temporarily boost occupancy, it devalues the property in the long run, erodes the owner's return on investment, and can set a precedent for future rent expectations that are difficult to reverse. This can also lead to a perception of instability within the community. A third incorrect approach that involves manipulating occupancy data or misrepresenting rent growth trends to stakeholders is a direct violation of ethical conduct and potentially securities laws, depending on the reporting structure. Transparency and accuracy in financial reporting are paramount. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted analysis that considers market realities, resident needs, owner objectives, and regulatory requirements. This includes conducting thorough market studies, analyzing resident feedback and retention data, forecasting economic trends, and consulting with legal counsel when implementing significant pricing strategies. The goal is to achieve optimal financial performance through sustainable and ethical practices, rather than short-term gains achieved through questionable means. Question 14. Risk assessment procedures indicate that while several individual apartment properties within the portfolio are exceeding their budgeted net operating income (NOI) targets, a deeper analysis of market trends and competitor performance suggests potential for greater portfolio-wide revenue optimization and risk mitigation. Which of the following approaches best aligns these property-level successes with the overall portfolio strategy? Option A. Reallocate a significant portion of the leasing and marketing budget from the high-performing properties to the underperforming ones to ensure all properties achieve at least average portfolio performance. Option B. Increase the individual performance targets for the exceeding properties to further incentivize their management teams without altering the overall portfolio strategy. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of each property's operational strategies and capital expenditure plans to determine how their individual successes contribute to or detract from the portfolio's long-term financial health, market positioning, and resident retention goals, and adjust resource allocation accordingly. Option D. Focus on replicating the specific tactics used by the highest performing properties across the entire portfolio, assuming these methods will universally drive superior results. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of each property's operational strategies and capital expenditure plans to determine how their individual successes contribute to or detract from the portfolio's long-term financial health, market positioning, and resident retention goals, and adjust resource allocation accordingly. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for a certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS, where individual property performance metrics appear strong in isolation, but may not contribute optimally to the overarching portfolio's strategic objectives. The professional challenge lies in discerning whether localized success translates to systemic portfolio enhancement, or if it represents a misallocation of resources or a missed opportunity for greater synergistic gains. Careful judgment is required to balance the immediate profitability of individual assets with the long-term, holistic health and growth of the entire portfolio, ensuring alignment with investor expectations and market positioning. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of each property's performance against established portfolio-wide key performance indicators, KPI, and strategic goals. This includes evaluating how each property's operational efficiency, leasing velocity, resident satisfaction scores, and capital expenditure plans contribute to the portfolio's overall risk profile, return on investment (ROI), and market competitiveness. For instance, a property exceeding its individual budget might be doing so by employing strategies that are unsustainable or detract from the portfolio's brand reputation, or it might be underleveraging opportunities for growth that could benefit other assets. Regulatory and ethical justification stems from the fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the portfolio and its stakeholders. This requires a strategic, data-driven approach that prioritizes the collective good over isolated successes, ensuring transparency and accountability in decision-making. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on individual property performance metrics without considering their impact on the broader portfolio strategy. For example, celebrating a property's high occupancy rate without analyzing if this is achieved through aggressive, potentially detrimental rent concessions that depress overall portfolio rental income, or if it diverts leasing resources from underperforming assets, would be a failure. This approach neglects the interconnectedness of portfolio components and can lead to suboptimal resource allocation and missed strategic opportunities. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize short-term revenue gains as specific property without assessing the long-term implications for resident retention, property condition, or market perception across the portfolio. This can lead to increased turnover, higher capital expenditure needs down the line, and damage to the portfolio's overall value proposition. Ethically, this demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to uphold the comprehensive responsibilities of a CAPS. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured evaluation framework. First, clearly define and communicate the portfolio's strategic objectives and KPIs. Second, gather comprehensive data from all properties, ensuring it is standardized and comparable. Third, conduct a comparative analysis, assessing each property's performance not only against its own targets, but also against portfolio benchmarks and strategic goals. Fourth, identify areas of misalignment or opportunity, considering both quantitative and qualitative factors. Finally, develop and implement strategic adjustments that foster portfolio-wide synergy and optimize overall performance, ensuring all decisions are documented and justifiable against the established strategy. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that a portfolio's net operating income, NOI, is a critical metric for evaluating operational performance. When reviewing the financial statements for a property within the portfolio, a supervisor encounters several line items. Which of the following interpretations of these line items, when considering their impact on NOI, best reflects sound financial management and adherence to industry standards for portfolio supervision? Option A. understanding that mortgage interest payments, as a direct cost of financing the property, are essential to its ongoing operation and therefore should be deducted when calculating NOI to arrive at a net profit figure. Option B. Differentiating between recurring property management fees, which are operational expenses, and the cost of a new HVAC system installation, which is a capital improvement and thus excluded from NOI. Option C. Recognizing that major roof repairs, while a significant expense, are a necessary component of maintaining the property's operational capacity and should be factored into the NOI calculation to reflect the true cost of operations. Option D. Including property taxes in the NOI calculation, as they are a mandatory cost associated with owning and operating the property, directly impacting its profitability. Correct answer is C. Recognizing that major roof repairs, while a significant expense, are a necessary component of maintaining the property's operational capacity and should be factored into the NOI calculation to reflect the true cost of operations. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a supervisor to interpret financial data beyond simple calculation, focusing on the underlying operational efficiency and strategic implications of net operating income, NOI. The supervisor must discern which factors are truly indicative of operational performance versus those that are either non-operational or represent capital expenditures, which are excluded from NOI. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the portfolio's financial health is accurately assessed, and that strategic decisions are based on sound financial principles, aligned with industry, best practices, and regulatory expectations for portfolio management. The correct approach involves identifying and categorizing all income and expense items to accurately calculate NOI. This means distinguishing between recurring operating revenues and expenses that directly impact the property's ability to generate profit from its core business, rent collection, maintenance, property management fees, etc., and non-operating items such as capital expenditures, major roof replacement, HVAC system upgrades, financing costs, mortgage interest, and income taxes. Regulatory frameworks, such as those guiding the Certified Apartment Portfolio Supervisor, CAPS, designation, emphasize that NOI is a measure of a property's profitability before debt service and income taxes, reflecting its operational performance. Therefore, correctly identifying and excluding non-operating items is crucial for accurate financial reporting and decision-making. An incorrect approach would be to include capital expenditures in the NOI calculation. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because capital expenditures are investments in the long-term physical asset and are treated as balance sheet items, not as operating expenses. Including them would artificially depress the NOI, misrepresenting the property's current operational profitability and potentially leading to flawed investment or management decisions. Another incorrect approach would be to include financing costs, such as mortgage interest, in the NOI calculation. This is a failure because NOI is calculated before debt service. Mortgage interest is a financing expense, not an operating expense, and its inclusion would distort the true operational performance of the property. A third incorrect approach would be to include income taxes in the NOI calculation. Similar to financing costs, income taxes are a result of profitability after operating and financing expenses, and are not part of the operational income calculation. Including them would misrepresent the property's ability to generate income from its operations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all financial statements and supporting documentation. Professionals should consult established accounting principles and industry-specific guidelines for real estate operations to ensure accurate classification of income and expenses. When in doubt, seeking clarification from accounting professionals or referring to CAPS curriculum materials on financial analysis is advisable. The focus should always be on understanding the purpose of NOI as a measure of operational efficiency and profitability, and ensuring that its calculation adheres strictly to these principles. Question 16. Market research demonstrates that a significant portion of the apartment portfolio is aging, with several properties approaching the end of their expected life cycles for critical building systems like HVAC and roofing. As a CAPS professional, what is the most appropriate approach to developing the upcoming year's maintenance budget to ensure long-term asset value and operational efficiency, while adhering to U.S. regulatory and ethical standards for property management? Option A. Allocate maintenance funds based on the previous year's budget, with minor adjustments for inflation, without conducting a detailed assessment of current property conditions or future capital needs. Option B. Focus solely on minimizing the current year's operating expenses by cutting back on all non-essential maintenance, including routine inspections and minor repairs, to maximize immediate profitability for the owner. Option C. Develop a comprehensive, multi-year capital improvement plan based on property assessments and projected life cycles, and then strategically integrate prioritized preventative maintenance and necessary system upgrades into the upcoming annual operating budget, seeking owner approval for phased investments. Option D. Allocate the majority of the maintenance budget to immediate, tenant-requested repairs and operational necessities, deferring any significant capital expenditures or preventative maintenance projects until future budget cycles when cash flow is projected to improve. The correct answer is D. Allocate the majority of the maintenance budget to immediate, tenant-requested repairs and operational necessities, deferring any significant capital expenditures or preventative maintenance projects until future budget cycles when cash flow is projected to improve. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in property management, balancing the need for proactive, long-term asset preservation with the immediate financial pressures of operating budgets. The CAPS designation emphasizes a comprehensive understanding of portfolio management, which includes not just financial performance, but also the physical integrity and long-term value of the assets. Regulatory compliance in this context, particularly within the U.S. framework relevant to CAPS, often centers on prudent financial management, adherence to owner/investor directives, and maintaining properties to meet safety and habitability standards. Correct approach involves a strategic allocation of funds that prioritizes preventative maintenance and capital improvements, even if it requires careful justification and potentially phased implementation. This aligns with the fiduciary duty of a portfolio supervisor to protect and enhance the value of the assets under management for the long-term benefit of the owner or investor. Regulatory guidance, while not always prescriptive on specific budget line items, generally supports responsible stewardship of assets, which includes anticipating and addressing potential issues before they become costly emergencies or negatively impact occupancy and rental income. This proactive stance is often implicitly or explicitly supported by owner agreements and industry best practices that CAPS professionals are expected to uphold. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on minimizing immediate operating expenses by deferring all non-essential maintenance or capital expenditures. This fails to recognize the long-term financial implications of neglect, such as increased emergency repair costs, potential loss of rental income due to tenant dissatisfaction or property deterioration, and a decline in asset value. Ethically and regulatorily, this approach could be seen as a breach of duty to the owner/investor, as it jeopardizes the asset's condition and future profitability. Another incorrect approach would be to allocate funds without a clear, data-driven plan, leading to inefficient spending or missed opportunities for cost savings through bulk purchasing or scheduled, preventative work. This lacks the strategic foresight expected of a CAPS professional and could lead to budget overruns or underperformance. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with a thorough assessment of the portfolio's current condition, projected needs based on age and usage, and owner/investor financial goals. This assessment should inform a multi-year capital improvement plan and a detailed annual operating budget that strategically allocates funds for both routine and preventative maintenance. Regular review and adjustment of the budget based on actual performance and evolving property needs are crucial. Transparency with owners/investors regarding budget proposals, justifications, and performance is also a key element of professional practice. Question 17. Quality control measures reveal that a leasing agent consistently failed to collect the required security deposit at the time of lease signing, instead allowing residents to pay it within 48 hours, a practice not outlined in the company's lease agreement addendum or tenant onboarding procedures. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the portfolio supervisor? Option A. Overlook the deviation, assuming it was an isolated incident and that the deposits will eventually be collected to avoid unnecessary administrative burden. Option B. Conduct a thorough investigation to understand why the policy was not followed, assess the financial risk to the company from outstanding deposits, and develop a plan to ensure future compliance which may include retraining or process adjustments. Option C. Advise the leasing agent to continue the practice of collecting deposits within 48 hours, as it appears to be a more convenient process for new residents, and update the company policy accordingly. Option D. Immediately issue a formal written warning to the leasing agent for noncompliance and require them to collect all outstanding security deposits within 24 hours. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough investigation to understand why the policy was not followed, assess the financial risk to the company from outstanding deposits, and develop a plan to ensure future compliance, which may include retraining or process adjustments. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for a certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS, where a deviation from established company policy is identified during a routine quality control review. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need for operational efficiency and tenant satisfaction with the imperative of strict adherence to documented procedures, which are often designed to ensure legal compliance, mitigate risk, and maintain consistent service delivery across the portfolio. A CAPS must exercise sound judgment to determine the appropriate response that upholds company standards without unnecessarily disrupting operations or alienating residents. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation to understand the root cause of the deviation, and then implementing corrective actions that address both the immediate issue and prevent recurrence. This aligns with the CAP's responsibility to oversee portfolio operations effectively and ensure compliance with internal controls and external regulations. Specifically, it requires a systematic process of fact-finding, root cause analysis, and the development of a remediation plan. This methodical approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes accountability, transparency, and the integrity of operational processes. It also reflects best practices in risk management, ensuring that potential liabilities are identified and addressed proactively. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the deviation without proper investigation, assuming it was an isolated incident or a minor oversight. This fails to address the underlying systemic issues that may have led to the policy breach, leaving the portfolio vulnerable to future noncompliance and potential legal or financial repercussions. Demonstrates a lack of diligence and oversight, which is contrary to the professional standards expected of a CAPS. Another incorrect approach is to immediately implement punitive measures without understanding the context or cause of the deviation. While accountability is important, a hasty disciplinary response can demoralize staff, create a climate of fear, and discourage employees from reporting potential issues in the future. It bypasses the crucial step of understanding why the policy was not followed, which is essential for effective problem-solving and process improvement. A third incorrect approach is to modify the policy to accommodate the observed deviation without a formal review and approval process. Company policies are typically established for specific legal, operational, or risk management reasons. Circumventing the established procedure for policy changes undermines the integrity of the policy framework and could inadvertently create new compliance risks or inconsistencies across the portfolio. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, gather all relevant facts about the deviation. Second, identify the root cause of the noncompliance. Third, assess the impact and potential risks associated with the deviation. Fourth, determine the most appropriate corrective and preventative actions, which may include retraining, process adjustments, or policy review. And finally, document the entire process and its resolution. Question 18. The evaluation methodology shows that a recent minor emergency incident at one property resulted in resident confusion regarding their responsibilities, leading to some property damage and potential liability concerns. To develop a robust risk mitigation strategy for the entire portfolio, which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and operational best practices? Option A. Increase insurance deductibles across the portfolio to offset potential minor losses from future incidents. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of existing lease agreements and resident communication protocol to ensure clear articulation of resident responsibilities during emergency situations. Option C. Take no immediate action, assuming the incident was an isolated event and unlikely to recur. Option D. Immediately implement a policy of mandatory resident eviction for any instance of non-compliance during emergency events. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of existing lease agreements and resident communication protocols to ensure clear articulation of resident responsibilities during emergency situations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a portfolio supervisor to balance the immediate financial implications of a risk event with the long-term operational stability and regulatory compliance of the properties. The pressure to minimize immediate losses can lead to short-sighted decisions that might violate fair housing laws or create future liabilities. Careful judgment is required to ensure that risk mitigation strategies are not only cost-effective, but also ethically sound and legally compliant, particularly concerning resident safety and privacy. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of existing lease agreements and resident communications to identify any potential ambiguities or omissions regarding resident responsibilities during emergency situations. This is the most effective strategy because it directly addresses the root cause of potential disputes and liabilities by ensuring clarity and transparency. Specifically, it aligns with the regulatory framework by proactively reinforcing the property's adherence to fair housing principles, by ensuring all residents receive consistent and legally sound information. Furthermore, it supports operational efficiency by minimizing the likelihood of future legal challenges or resident complaints stemming from unclear expectations during emergencies, thereby optimizing the risk mitigation process. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a blanket policy of immediate resident eviction for any perceived noncompliance during an emergency is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This approach fails to consider the nuances of individual circumstances and could violate fair housing laws by disproportionately impacting protected classes. It also bypasses established legal eviction procedures, creating significant legal liability for the property owner. Focusing solely on increasing insurance deductibles without addressing the underlying operational gaps that led to the risk event is a financially short-sighted strategy. While it might reduce immediate out-of-pocket expenses for minor incidents, it does not mitigate the actual risks or prevent future, potentially larger, losses. This approach neglects the proactive risk management required by industry best practices and could lead to significant financial exposure if a major event occurs. Ignoring the incident and hoping it does not recur is a failure of due diligence and risk management. This passive approach leaves the portfolio vulnerable to repeat occurrences and potential escalation of damages. It directly contradicts the responsibility of a portfolio supervisor to identify, assess, and mitigate risks, potentially leading to severe financial and reputational damage, and violating the duty of care owed to residents and owners. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to risk mitigation that begins with thorough assessment and analysis. This involves understanding the specific risks, their potential impact, and the existing controls. The next step is to develop strategies that are both proactive and reactive, ensuring they are compliant with all applicable laws and ethical standards. This includes reviewing and updating policies, procedures, and resident communications to ensure clarity and fairness. Finally, continuous monitoring and evaluation of the effectiveness of these strategies are crucial to adapt to changing circumstances and maintain optimal risk management. Question 19. Operational review demonstrates that the portfolio's net operating income (NOI) for the current quarter is 15% below budgeted projections. The income statement shows a decrease in rental revenue and a slight increase in operating expenses. What is the most appropriate initial step for the certified apartment portfolio supervisor to take in analyzing this situation? Option A. Conduct a detailed line-item analysis of both rental income and operating expenses to identify specific drivers of the variance. Option B. Assume the variance is due to seasonal market fluctuations and wait for the next reporting period to reassess. Option C. Immediately implement a portfolio-wide rent reduction strategy to boost occupancy and revenue. Option D. Focus solely on reducing utility costs across all properties to offset the revenue shortfall. The correct answer is C. Immediately implement a portfolio-wide rent reduction strategy to boost occupancy and revenue. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for a certified apartment portfolio supervisor, CAPS, where financial reporting, specifically the income statement, reveals a significant deviation from budgeted expectations. Challenge lies in accurately interpreting the root cause of this deviation and determining the most appropriate course of action, balancing the need for immediate corrective measures with a thorough understanding of underlying operational or market factors. Misinterpreting the data or reacting impulsively can lead to ineffective strategies, wasted resources, and potentially damage to the portfolio's financial health and investor confidence. The CAPs must exercise sound judgment, relying on their understanding of financial analysis principles and regulatory compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a detailed investigation into the specific line items contributing to the variance. This means dissecting the income statement to identify whether the shortfall is due to lower than expected rental income, occupancy issues, concessions, rent roll changes, higher than expected operating expenses, maintenance, utilities, payroll, marketing, or a combination of both. This granular analysis allows for the identification of precise operational issues that can then be addressed with targeted solutions. For example, if rental income is down, the focus shifts to leasing strategies, pricing, and resident retention. If expenses are up, the focus is on vendor contracts, operational efficiencies, and budget adherence. This methodical approach aligns with the CAP's responsibility to provide accurate and insightful financial reporting and analysis, ensuring that management decisions are data-driven and compliant with generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, and any specific reporting requirements mandated by investors or lenders. The CAPs must ensure that all financial reporting is transparent and reflects the true economic performance of the assets. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately implement broad cost-cutting measures across all departments without understanding the specific drivers of the income statement variance. This is flawed because it fails to address the root cause. Cost cuts might be ineffective if the primary issue is revenue generation and could even negatively impact operations or resident satisfaction, leading to further financial problems. This approach bypasses the critical analysis required for effective financial management and could violate fiduciary duties by not acting in the best interest of the portfolio. Another incorrect approach is to solely focus on increasing rental rates without investigating the reasons for the current revenue shortfall. If the issue is declining occupancy or market saturation, simply raising rents could exacerbate the problem by making units less competitive and leading to higher vacancy rates. This reactive measure ignores the need for a comprehensive understanding of market dynamics and operational performance, which is a core responsibility of a CAPS. It also risks violating lease agreements or fair housing regulations if implemented improperly. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss the variance as a temporary market fluctuation without further investigation. While market conditions can impact performance, a significant deviation warrants a deeper dive to confirm if it's truly external or if internal operational issues are contributing. Failing to investigate could mean missing critical internal inefficiencies or emerging market trends that require strategic adjustments, thus failing to uphold the duty of diligent oversight and accurate financial reporting. Professional reasoning. When faced with significant variances in financial reporting, a CAP should employ a structured decision-making process. First, acknowledge and document the variance. Second, initiate a detailed variance analysis, breaking down the income statement and balance sheet to identify the specific accounts and drivers of the deviation. Third, gather supporting operational data and market intelligence to contextualize the financial findings. Fourth, develop a set of potential root causes and test them against the available data. Fifth, formulate targeted recommendations based on the most probable root causes, considering both short-term corrective actions and long-term strategic adjustments. Finally, communicate findings and recommendations clearly and concisely to stakeholders, ensuring transparency and facilitating informed decision-making. This process ensures that actions taken are strategic, data-driven, and aligned with the fiduciary responsibilities of the CAPs. Question 20. System analysis indicates a resident has lodged a formal complaint regarding a recent maintenance repair, alleging the work was incomplete and caused further damage to their apartment. The resident is highly agitated and feels their concerns have been ignored by the maintenance team. As the Certified Apartment Portfolio Supervisor, CAPS, what is the most appropriate initial course of action to manage this resident relations and conflict resolution scenario? Option A. Schedule an immediate meeting with the resident to listen to their concerns, Assure them of a thorough investigation into the maintenance work and their allegations, and outline the next steps. Option B. Immediately dispatch a senior maintenance technician to reevaluate the repair and document any potential additional damage without speaking to the resident first. Option C. Inform the resident that the maintenance team has a strong track record and their complaint is likely a misunderstanding. Option D. Advise the resident that maintenance issues are handled by the maintenance supervisor, and they should direct their complaints there. The correct answer is A. Schedule an immediate meeting with the resident to listen to their concerns, assure them of a thorough investigation into the maintenance work and their allegations, and outline the next steps. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in property management, a resident dispute that escalates due to perceived unfair treatment and potential lease violations. A professional challenge lies in balancing the resident's rights and concerns with the property owner's obligations and the need to maintain a peaceful community environment. Failure to address the situation promptly and fairly can lead to increased resident dissatisfaction, potential legal action, damage to the property's reputation, and a decline in occupancy rates. Careful judgment is required to de-escalate the conflict, investigate the claims objectively, and apply lease terms and relevant regulations consistently. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, empathetic, and legally compliant response. This begins with actively listening to the residents' concerns without interruption, acknowledging their feelings, and assuring them that their complaint will be investigated thoroughly. Following this, a prompt and impartial investigation into both the residents' claims and the actions of the maintenance staff is crucial. This investigation should involve reviewing maintenance logs, interviewing the staff involved, and inspecting the reported issue. Based on the findings, clear communication with the resident regarding the investigation's outcome and any corrective actions taken is essential. This approach aligns with ethical property management principles of fairness, transparency, and responsiveness, and adheres to the implied covenant of quiet enjoyment often found in residential leases and supported by landlord-tenant laws. It also respects the resident's right to a safe and habitable living environment. Incorrect approaches analysis. Dismissing the resident's complaint outright without investigation is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This demonstrates a lack of empathy and disrespect for the resident's concerns, potentially violating the lease agreement's implied terms of service and good faith. It also fails to address potential maintenance oversights or staff misconduct, leaving the property vulnerable to future issues and legal challenges. Immediately siding with the maintenance staff without a thorough investigation is also professionally unacceptable. This creates an appearance of bias and can alienate the resident, making future conflict resolution more difficult. It neglects the property manager's duty to objectively assess all sides of a dispute and could lead to overlooking genuine staff errors or policy violations, potentially exposing the property owner to liability. Focusing solely on the financial cost of rectifying the issue without addressing the resident's experience and the underlying cause of the complaint is another failure. While financial prudence is important, prioritizing cost over resident satisfaction and problem resolution can lead to a breakdown in the landlord-tenant relationship, increased turnover, and negative reviews, ultimately costing more in the long run. This approach neglects the importance of resident retention and the reputational impact of poor service. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach resident disputes by first prioritizing active listening and empathy to de-escalate the situation. This should be followed by a commitment to a fair and impartial investigation, gathering all relevant facts from all parties involved. The decision-making process should then involve applying lease terms and applicable landlord-tenant laws to the findings. Finally, clear, transparent, and timely communication with the resident about the investigation's outcome and any subsequent actions is paramount to maintaining trust and a positive landlord-tenant relationship.